The night wraps around us like an ancient cloak, and in this quiet darkness, we travel backward through corridors of time where questions outnumber answers. History whispers to us across millennia, carrying riddles that have puzzled the greatest minds, mysteries so profound that centuries of investigation have only deepened their enigma. Tonight, we journey into 10 of humanity's most captivating, unsolved puzzles, stories where facts dissolve into fog and certainty crumbles like aged parchment. Let the stillness settle around you as we begin our exploration into the unknown, where every answer we seek seems to retreat further into shadow. Our first mystery takes us to the heart of Central America, to cities swallowed by jungle and civilizations that vanished like smoke on the wind. The Maya were not merely inhabitants of their time, they were architects of wonder, mathematicians who calculated the movements of celestial bodies with precision that would not be matched for centuries. They built pyramids that pierced the sky, carved hieroglyphs that told stories of gods and kings, created a calendar so sophisticated that it tracked cosmic cycles spanning thousands of years. At their peak, between the years 200 and 900 of the Common Era, Maya cities thrived across what we now call Guatemala, Belize, Honduras and southern Mexico. Tikal, Palenque, Copan. These names echo with grandeur, cities of tens of thousands where markets bustled, temples rose in stepped magnificence, and astronomical observatories mapped the heavens. The Maya understood zero before most civilizations even conceived of the concept. They charted Venus with accuracy that astounds modern astronomers. Their mathematical system allowed them to perform calculations reaching into millions, tracking time both backward to mythical creation and forward to distant futures. Their architecture demonstrated engineering brilliance, with structures aligned to solstices and equinoxes, buildings that captured light at precise moments to mark sacred days. This was no primitive society stumbling through darkness. This was a civilization at its zenith, a culture that had conquered its environment and reached toward the cosmos. Yet something went catastrophically wrong. Sometime around the year 800, the great cities began to empty. Not gradually, not through slow decline, but in a collapse so swift and complete that it defies easy explanation. Palaces stood abandoned mid-construction, tools left where craftsmen had set them down, inscriptions that simply stopped mid-sentence. Within a century, cities that had stood for 1,000 years were silent, reclaimed by jungle, their plazas empty of the footsteps that had worn their stones smooth. The southern lowlands, once the beating heart of Maya civilization, became a ghost realm of overgrown pyramids and forgotten glories. Millions of people disappeared from the archaeological record, leaving behind only their monuments and their mystery. What could cause such a complete abandonment? Scholars have proposed drought, and indeed evidence shows severe dry periods during the 9th century. Tree ring data reveals decades when rain failed, when crops withered, when the cenotes and reservoirs that sustained cities ran dangerously low. But the Maya had survived droughts before. They are masters of water management, building sophisticated systems of channels and reservoirs. Would drought alone cause them to abandon everything? To walk away from temples they had built over generations, from tombs of their ancestors, from the very identity they had carved in stone? Others point to warfare. Hieroglyphic inscriptions speak of conflicts between city-states, of captured kings and burned temples. Perhaps endless fighting exhausted their civilization, turned productive lands into battlegrounds, disrupted the trade routes that connected their world. Archaeological evidence shows increased fortifications in the final centuries, defensive walls around cities that had once stood open and confident. But war had always been part of Maya life, ritualized combat between rivals that rarely led to total destruction. What changed to make conflict so devastating that entire regions were abandoned? Environmental degradation offers another thread in this tangled mystery. The Maya transformed their landscape, clearing forests for agriculture, building cities of limestone that required vast amounts of wood for processing. Perhaps they pushed their environment beyond its capacity to sustain them, creating an ecological crisis that undermined the very foundations of their civilization. Soil studies show erosion in some areas, evidence of deforestation and agricultural intensification. Yet this theory struggles to explain why some regions collapsed while others, facing similar environmental pressures, continued to thrive for centuries more. Disease enters the conversation, invisible killer that it is. Perhaps epidemics swept through densely populated cities, though we have scant physical evidence of mass mortality events. Social upheaval whispers from some scholars' lips, revolution against the elite, peasants rejecting the demands of kings who claimed to channel the gods but could not prevent catastrophe. But if rebellion toppled the ruling class, why abandon the cities entirely? Why not simply install new leaders and continue? The truth that haunts researchers is that no single explanation fits all the evidence. The collapse was not uniform. Some cities fell while others rose. Some regions emptied while nearby areas flourished. The Maya did not disappear as a people. Their descendants live on today, millions strong across Central America, speaking Maya languages and preserving traditions that stretch back millennia. But the classical civilization, the great city-states with their soaring pyramids and intricate hieroglyphic writing, that world ended in ways we still struggle to comprehend. Perhaps the answer lies not in choosing between theories, but in understanding how multiple crises could cascade together, how drought and warfare and environmental stress and social upheaval could interweave into a perfect storm of collapse. Or perhaps some crucial element still eludes us, some factor that the archaeological record cannot preserve, that the ruins cannot speak. The Maya cities stand in jungle twilight, silent witnesses to a catastrophe they cannot explain, monuments to human achievement and human mystery intertwined. As we leave the abandoned plazas of Tikal and turn toward our next enigma, we carry with us this uncomfortable truth. Even at the height of power, even with all their knowledge and sophistication, civilizations can fall into darkness so complete that centuries later we can only guess at what destroyed them. The Maya vanished not into myth, but into a silence that asks more questions than it answers, and in that silence, history keeps its most profound secrets. Our path now leads us northward and forward through time to a treasure so magnificent that wars were fought for its possession, a masterpiece that vanished in the chaos of the 20th century and has never been seen again. The object of our second mystery was called the eighth wonder of the world, and those who saw it spoke of entering a chamber where walls themselves seemed to glow with captured sunlight. The amber room was not merely decoration, it was alchemy transformed into architecture. 6 tons of amber panels backed with gold leaf, adorned with mirrors and mosaics, a space where light danced and multiplied until visitors felt they stood inside a jewel. Created in the early 1700s for Frederick I of Prussia, the room represented the absolute pinnacle of Baroque artistry. Countless pieces of amber fitted together with such precision that the seams disappeared, creating the illusion of solid walls carved from fossilized resin. Amber itself carries mystery in its golden depths, ancient tree sap that trapped insects and plant matter millions of years ago, preserving moments of prehistoric life in translucent tombs. The artisans who created the amber room selected each piece for colour and clarity, ranging from pale honey to deep cognac, arranged in patterns that caught and reflected light in endless variation. The panels depicted allegorical scenes, flourishes of Rococo design, intricate geometric patterns that revealed new details with each viewing. Mirrors positioned between amber sections multiplied the effect, creating an infinite regression of golden light, a room that seemed to extend beyond its physical walls into realms of pure radiance. In 1716, Frederick William I of Prussia gave this masterpiece to Peter the Great of Russia, cementing an alliance between their nations with a gift beyond monetary value. The room travelled to the Catherine Palace near St. Petersburg, where Russian craftsmen expanded it to fill an even larger space, adding more amber, more gold, more intricate details. For 2 centuries, the Amber Room remained one of Russia's greatest treasures, a destination for nobility and artists, a symbol of imperial grandeur and artistic achievement. Those who entered described feeling transported, surrounded by warmth and light, even on the darkest winter days, as if summer itself had been captured and contained within those glowing walls. Then came the catastrophe of the Second World War. In June 1941, Nazi forces launched Operation Barbarossa, the invasion of the Soviet Union that would become the largest military campaign in human history. German armies swept across Soviet territory, capturing cities and palaces, seizing art treasures with systematic efficiency. The Nazis had special units dedicated to looting cultural heritage, cataloguing and shipping masterpieces back to Germany even as battles raged around them. When German forces approached Leningrad, Soviet curators desperately tried to save the Catherine Palace's treasures, but the Amber Room presented an impossible challenge. Amber is fragile, prone to cracking and crumbling if handled roughly. The panels had been installed for centuries, integrated into the very architecture of their chamber. Soviet workers attempted to hide the room behind wallpaper, a desperate gambit that fooled no one. German experts, recognizing the treasure immediately, spent 36 hours carefully dismantling the panels, packing them into 27 crates. By September 1941, the Amber Room had left Russia. Transported to Königsberg Castle in East Prussia, modern-day Kaliningrad, where it was reassembled and displayed in the Castle Museum. For 2 years, the Amber Room remained in Königsberg, exhibited as a prize of war, proof of German military triumph. But by 1944, the tide had turned. Allied bombing raids devastated German cities, and advancing Soviet forces threatened East Prussia from the east. In August 1944, British bombers attacked Königsberg, and the castle suffered significant damage. The director of the Königsberg Museum, Alfred Rode, claimed the Amber Room survived the bombing, disassembled once again and stored safely in the castle's basement. But when Soviet forces captured Königsberg in April 1945, they found the castle in ruins, gutted by fire and bombardment, and of the Amber Room, not a single fragment remained. What happened in those final chaotic months? Theories proliferate like branches in a dark forest, each path leading to different conclusions, none arriving at certainty. Some believe the room burned in the castle fires, 6 tons of amber and wood reduced to ash and smoke, the world's most magnificent decorative space destroyed in the inferno of war. Amber is flammable, and the temperatures in a burning building could indeed consume it entirely, leaving no trace for investigators to find. This theory offers tragic closure, the amber room as casualty of the very conflict that led to its looting. Poetic justice, perhaps, but devastating loss. Others insist the room was evacuated before the bombing intensified, packed into crates and moved to locations unknown. Throughout Germany in the war's final months, Nazi officials hid looted art in mines, caves, castles, underground bunkers, anywhere they hoped treasures might survive the Reich's collapse. Perhaps the amber room rests in a flooded mineshaft, sealed in a forgotten cave, buried in rubble somewhere between Königsberg and Berlin. Treasure hunters have pursued this possibility for decades, using ground-penetrating radar and archival research, following leads and rumours that dissipate like morning fog. A darker possibility whispers through some accounts, that the room lies at the bottom of the Baltic Sea. In the war's final days, ships packed with refugees and cargo fled westward from advancing Soviet forces, and Allied submarines did not always distinguish between military and civilian vessels. The Wilhelm Gustloff, the Goya, the General von Steuben, these ships sank with thousands of lives and untold cargo. Could the amber room rest in their holds, crushed under cold water, beyond recovery even if located? Maritime archaeologists occasionally discover new wrecks, but the Baltic keeps its secrets well, and even known wrecks remain largely unexplored. Some researchers point to reports of crates shipped to destinations across Germany in those final months, fragmentary records that suggest the amber room might have been divided, panels separated and sent to different locations to increase chances of survival. This scattering would make recovery exponentially more difficult, pieces potentially hidden in multiple countries, owned by collectors who do not realize what they possess, or destroyed piecemeal across decades. A few amber fragments have surfaced over the years, claimed to be from the original room, but authentication proves nearly impossible. Amber from the 1700s looks much like amber from any other era. In 2003, Russia completed a painstaking reconstruction of the amber room, using old photographs and documents to recreate the original's splendor. The new room stands in the Catherine Palace, magnificent and glowing, a resurrection of lost beauty. Yet it is not the original, and the original's fate remains unknown. Perhaps it burned, perhaps it drowned, perhaps it waits in darkness for discovery. The mystery endures because war creates chaos where documentation fails, where witnesses disappear, where treasure can vanish as thoroughly as if it never existed. The Amber Room teaches us that even objects of immense value and cultural significance can slip through history's fingers, that the chaos of conflict erases not just lives but heritage, not just buildings but the stories contained within them. Somewhere, perhaps, 6 tons of amber still exist, packed in rotting crates, buried under rubble, hidden in a cave no longer marked on any map. Or perhaps they became ash and smoke decades ago, returned to the air as all material things eventually must. The golden walls that once made visitors weep with their beauty have become a mystery as deep as any amber's fossilized core, holding secrets we may never extract. We leave this vanished chamber of light and turn our attention to an object far smaller but equally baffling, a device pulled from the Mediterranean that suggests our ancestors' knowledge reached further than we ever imagined. In the year 1900, sponge divers working off the Greek island of Antikythera discovered a Roman shipwreck dating to approximately 70 to 60 BC. Among the bronze statues and ceramic amphorae, they found a corroded lump of bronze and wood that seemed unremarkable at first, merely another artifact from antiquity's sea floor. But as the encrusted mass dried and began to split apart, researchers noticed something extraordinary. Gears. Dozens of precisely cut bronze gears, meshing together in mechanical complexity that should not exist in an object 2,000 years old. The ancient world, in our standard historical narrative, did not possess such sophisticated mechanical technology. Gears of this precision, we believed, emerged during the medieval period or Renaissance, not in the time of Julius Caesar. Yet here they were, undeniable physical evidence that our assumptions about ancient capabilities required immediate revision. The Antikythera mechanism, as scholars named it, consists of at least 30 bronze gears housed in a wooden case roughly the size of a shoebox. The gears are cut with triangular teeth, a design that reduces wear and improves accuracy, demonstrating understanding of mechanical principles we associate with much later periods. X-ray imaging and computed tomography scans conducted over subsequent decades revealed layer upon layer of complexity. Multiple gear trains, differential gearing, a system of pointers and dials on the device's face, inscriptions in ancient Greek covering nearly every available surface. As researchers painstakingly decoded these inscriptions and analysed the gear ratios, a stunning picture emerged. This was not a simple timepiece or decorative object. This was an astronomical calculator of breathtaking sophistication, designed to predict the positions of the sun, moon, and planets, to forecast eclipses, to track the cycles that governed ancient Greek calendars and religious festivals. The mechanism's main dial represented the zodiac and the Egyptian calendar year, with pointers indicating the positions of celestial bodies. A subsidiary dial predicted eclipses using the Saros cycle, a period of 223 lunar months discovered by Babylonian astronomers, built into bronze gears by Greek craftsmen. Another dial tracked the Metonic cycle, the 19-year period after which lunar phases repeat on the same solar calendar dates, used to reconcile lunar and solar calendars. The device even accounted for the moon's elliptical orbit, incorporating the work of the astronomer Hipparchus, showing that its creators understood celestial mechanics at a level we assumed was not reached until Kepler's laws in the 17th century. Who built this marvel? The shipwreck's location and cargo suggest it was travelling from the eastern Mediterranean to Rome, perhaps carrying luxury goods and scientific instruments for wealthy Roman patrons. Scholars debate the mechanism's origin, with Rhodes being a strong candidate, home to the astronomer Hipparchus and a tradition of mechanical innovation. The inscriptions mention months used in Corinthian colonies, suggesting possible construction in Corinth or one of its settlements. But whether it was a unique masterpiece or representative of a whole class of such devices, we cannot know. Literary sources from antiquity mention mechanical wonders. Cicero describes a device made by Archimedes that showed the motions of sun, moon, and planets. But we dismiss such accounts as exaggeration or misunderstanding until the Antikythera mechanism proved that ancient authors might have been reporting facts, not fantasies. The technological implications stagger the mind. Creating gears this precise required advanced metallurgy, sophisticated tools, mathematical knowledge to calculate the gear ratios needed for astronomical accuracy, and mechanical insight to design the gear trains. The differential gear, a component we associate with modern automotive transmissions, appears in this ancient device. Someone in the ancient world understood not just the heavens, but how to model celestial motions in bronze, how to transform mathematical theory into working mechanism. And this was not isolated genius stumbling onto a solution. The inscription suggests this was one of several similar devices, part of a technological tradition we've otherwise lost completely. Why did this technology disappear? The mechanism dates to the 1st century BC, yet nothing comparable appears in the archaeological record for over 1,000 years. The knowledge required to build such devices seems to have evaporated, leaving later civilizations to reinvent mechanical computing slowly and independently. Some scholars point to the shift from Hellenistic Greek culture to Roman, suggesting Romans valued different forms of knowledge and allowed these sophisticated traditions to fade. Others note how dependent such technology was on specific craftsmen, individual masters whose knowledge died with them, especially in times of war and social upheaval. The transition from scrolls to codices may have contributed. Earlier technical treatises written on fragile papyrus lost when libraries burned or simply decayed. Their contents never transferred to more durable formats. The device also raises uncomfortable questions about the standard narrative of technological progress. We imagine advancement as linear, primitive giving way to sophisticated, ignorance replaced by knowledge in steady progression. But the Antikythera mechanism demonstrates that history contains peaks and valleys, that ancient peoples achieved sophistication in certain domains that was then lost, requiring later cultures to rediscover principles once well known. How much other knowledge disappeared? What other capabilities did our ancestors possess that left no trace in the archaeological record except perhaps one barnacle-encrusted mechanism pulled from the sea by accident? Modern recreations of the Antikythera mechanism work perfectly, their gears clicking through astronomical cycles with the accuracy inscribed in their original design. We understand what it did. We can build new versions that replicate its function. But understanding the how and what does not fully answer the why. Why build something so complex? Wealthy patrons could afford skilled astronomers to calculate celestial positions, scribes to maintain calendars, priests to determine festival dates. What motivated someone to invest the enormous resources required to encode this knowledge in bronze? Was it pedagogical, a teaching tool to demonstrate astronomical principles? Was it philosophical, an expression of the belief that cosmos operated as a perfect machine, understandable and predictable? Was it simply the desire to create beauty in mechanical form, art and science united in gears and dials? Perhaps the most haunting aspect of the Antikythera mechanism is its loneliness. It sits in the National Archaeological Museum in Athens, unique, an artifact without context or contemporaries. Every other ancient mechanical device we possess is simpler by orders of magnitude. Nothing else approaches its complexity until medieval Islamic and European clockwork. It exists as evidence of a technological tradition we can barely glimpse, like finding a modern smartphone in a Viking grave, proof that our mental maps of the past contain vast unexplored territories. The Greeks who built this device saw the heavens as knowable, predictable, mechanical in their regularity. They possessed the will and skill to capture cosmic motion in bronze. And then that knowledge vanished into centuries of darkness, preserved only by accident, by shipwreck, by the fortuitous discovery of sponge divers seeking entirely different treasures. As the gears of the Antikythera mechanism continue their silent testimony to forgotten genius, we turn now to another artifact that speaks in a language no one can read, a book that has defeated every attempt at comprehension for centuries. In the vaults of Yale University's Voynich Rare Book and Manuscript Library rests a book that should not exist. 240 vellum pages covered in text written in an alphabet no scholar recognizes, accompanied by illustrations so strange they seem drawn from dreams or madness. The Voynich manuscript, named for the book dealer who acquired it in 1912, has been carbon dated to the early 1500s, making it genuinely old, not a modern hoax. Yet despite centuries of attempts by linguists, cryptographers, historians, and computer scientists, no one has managed to read a single word with certainty. The text flows smoothly across pages, divided into apparent paragraphs and sections, suggesting coherent content rather than random gibberish. But coherent in what language? Following what rules? Conveying what knowledge? These questions have no answers. The illustrations divide the manuscript into apparent sections, each focused on different subject matter. The botanical section shows plants, drawn with enough detail to suggest real species, yet no botanist has conclusively identified any of them with known flora. The drawings combine features from different plants, create forms that do not exist in nature, or depict species that perhaps flourished in regions we have not considered. Some illustrations bear vague resemblance to sunflowers or pansies, but the details do not quite match, as if the artist drew from memory or imagination rather than direct observation. This section alone comprises over 100 pages, suggesting extensive herbal knowledge or complete fantasy, depending on interpretation. Another section appears astronomical or astrological, showing circular diagrams filled with stars, zodiac symbols that resemble traditional forms, but include unfamiliar variations, diagrams of cosmic relationships that follow no system we recognize. The illustrations show naked female figures arranged in zodiacal context, astronomical charts with sun and moon faces, complex circular designs radiating from central points. Is this astrology, astronomy, cosmology, religion, or simply artistic decoration? The symbols seem deliberate, organized according to some principle, but what principle remains invisible to modern analysis? A third section shows what appears to be pharmaceutical or alchemical content, with drawings of containers, roots, and plants connected by elaborate plumbing systems, perhaps representing distillation processes or the flow of essences. Naked women appear in pools of coloured liquid, connected by tubes and channels, imagery that might represent bathing, medical treatment, or symbolic transformation. The biological or medical section includes more female figures, anatomical diagrams that do not correspond to actual human anatomy, systems that might represent bodily processes understood through metaphor rather than literal description. The final section contains only text, dense paragraphs uninterrupted by illustration, perhaps recipes, instructions, spells, prayers, or narrative. Without understanding the language, we cannot even determine the genre. The manuscript ends incomplete, suggesting it was meant to contain more pages, that the project was abandoned, or that subsequent sections were lost. The existing pages show no corrections or mistakes, implying either careful copying from another source or composition by someone so fluent in this strange script that errors did not occur. The text itself exhibits statistical properties that have fueled decades of debate. The writing system uses roughly 25 distinct characters, comparable to Latin alphabets, arranged into what appear to be words of varying length. These words follow patterns. Certain characters appear more frequently in certain positions, suggesting grammatical structure or morphology. The text shows too much internal order to be random gibberish, but too much strangeness to match known languages. Some words repeat frequently, perhaps common words like articles or prepositions, while others appear rarely. The distribution follows Zipf's law, a principle governing word frequency in natural languages, suggesting the text represents actual language rather than elaborate nonsense. Theories multiply like the manuscript's mysterious plants. Some scholars argue it is an elaborate cipher, text written in known language but encrypted using a substitution or transposition system. Countless cryptographers have attempted to crack it, applying techniques that broke other historical ciphers, but the Voynich text resists all approaches. During World War II, American and British codebreakers, trained experts who decrypted enemy communications, attempted the manuscript in their spare time and admitted complete failure. Modern computer analysis using techniques that solved other substitution ciphers in minutes produces only incomprehensible results. Others propose the text represents an artificial language invented by the author for privacy, philosophical reasons, or simple creativity. Historical figures occasionally created new alphabets and languages. Perhaps the Voynich author was a Renaissance polymath experimenting with linguistic creation. But inventing a complete language with consistent grammar and extensive vocabulary requires enormous effort. And why illustrate such a project with botanical and astronomical drawings? What purpose would such secrecy serve? A darker possibility suggests the manuscript might be a hoax, an elaborate fraud created to sell to collectors as an ancient mystical text. Renaissance Europe had markets for exotic manuscripts. Grimoires and alchemical text commanded high prices from wealthy patrons interested in occult knowledge. Perhaps a clever forger created convincing gibberish, added mysterious illustrations, and sold it as coded wisdom from ancient sources. But this theory struggles with the carbon dating. The vellum is genuinely 15th or early 16th century, and the text shows no signs of modern intervention. If hoax, it was contemporary to the manuscript's creation, which merely moves the mystery to different questions. Some researchers propose the text represents a real but lost language, perhaps from a community that left no other written records, a cipher built on grammatical structures unknown to modern linguistics. Others suggest glossolalia, writing produced in trance states, mystical composition where the author believed themselves channeling divine or supernatural sources. The statistical regularities might then reflect subconscious linguistic patterns rather than conscious meaning, the appearance of language without actual semantic content. Recent computer analysis using artificial intelligence and machine learning has proposed the underlying language might be Hebrew written in code, or Latin compressed through special abbreviation systems. These analyses generate headlines but convince few experts. The proposed solutions require so many special cases and exceptions that they explain nothing while adding complexity. Each new attempted solution reveals more clearly how resistant the manuscript is to decryption, how thoroughly it conceals its secrets if secrets it indeed contains. The Voynich manuscript represents epistemological frustration, a text that appears meaningful but denies meaning, a book that looks like it should be readable yet remains incomprehensible. It sits behind glass, available for study, every page photographed and digitized, accessible to anyone with internet connection, yet it guards its mysteries as thoroughly as if buried in a tomb. We possess the physical object. We can analyze it chemically, date it accurately, count its words and catalogue its illustrations. But we cannot read it, cannot access whatever knowledge or nonsense the author committed to vellum 500 years ago. It is simultaneously available and inaccessible, present and absent, a message we cannot receive despite holding the medium in our hands. Perhaps future advances in cryptography or linguistics will crack the manuscript's code, reveal it as medical textbook or herbal, alchemical treatise or fantasy novel, confession or prayer. Perhaps it will remain forever unread, its pages turning in scholarly hands for centuries more, yielding no secrets, offering no closure. The Voynich manuscript reminds us that proximity to knowledge does not guarantee comprehension, that we can hold mysteries in our hands without possessing their meaning. We close this strange book and shift our gaze to monuments of stone, to structures built with such precision that even our modern technology struggles to explain how ancient peoples achieved what we see before us. The Great Pyramid of Khufu rises from the Giza plateau like a mountain made by human will. 2,300,000 blocks of limestone and granite arranged with geometric precision that astounds engineers 45 centuries after its construction. Each block weighs on average 2.5 tons. Some granite slabs in the burial chamber exceed 60 tons. The entire structure originally stood 146 meters tall, making it the tallest human construction for nearly 4,000 years. The numbers themselves invoke awe, a base covering 13 acres, sides originally clad in polished white limestone that reflected sunlight visible for miles, internal passages and chambers cut through solid rock, with tolerances measured in millimeters. This was not crude piling of stones, but sophisticated architecture implementing solutions to engineering problems we still struggle to fully understand. The precision of the pyramid's construction defies simple explanation. The base is leveled to within 21 millimeters across its 230-meter width, an accuracy that modern builders with laser levels would find challenging. The 4 sides are lined to the cardinal directions with error less than 4 minutes of arc, better than most modern buildings achieve. The original casing stones, mostly lost to medieval quarrying, fitted together so perfectly that mortar served more as lubricant during placement than structural necessity. Gaps between stones too thin to insert a knife blade. The internal passages maintain consistent angles and dimensions through dozens of meters of solid rock. The Grand Gallery ascends at precisely 26 degrees for 46 meters, its corbelled walls narrowing to a flat ceiling with architectural sophistication that would not reappear in Europe for millennia. How did ancient Egyptians accomplish this? The standard answer involves ramps, millions of workers, decades of sustained effort coordinated by centralized authority. Archaeological evidence confirms large workforce housing near the pyramids, bakeries that could feed thousands, copper tools suitable for cutting limestone, administrative papyri recording work gang assignments and deliveries. We know the Egyptians possessed the organizational capacity, the workforce, the basic technology. But between knowing they built it and understanding precisely how lies a chasm filled with engineering challenges that resist easy solution. The quarrying alone presents formidable problems. 2 million blocks means cutting and dressing 280 blocks per day. If the pyramid took 23 years to build, as ancient sources suggest. Each block required workers to cut 3 sides free from the bedrock, split the 4th side using wedges, then dress the block to approximate final dimensions. Copper chisels, even with frequent resharpening, cut limestone slowly. Workers likely used dolerite pounders for the hardest work, bronze saws with quartz sand as abrasive for finer cutting. The logistics of maintaining thousands of tools, training workers, coordinating teams across multiple quarries, transporting the finished blocks to the construction site. All of this required administrative sophistication, matching the engineering achievement. Transportation from quarry to pyramid poses additional mysteries. The Tura limestone for the casing came from quarries across the Nile, requiring boats capable of carrying multi-ton loads, docks for loading and unloading, roads or ramps from riverbank to plateau. The granite for burial chambers travelled from Aswan, 800 kilometres south. Massive slabs somehow loaded onto ships or barges, floated downstream, and manoeuvred into position deep within the growing pyramid. Modern experiments moving similar weights using ancient technologies demonstrate it is possible. Teams of workers pulling sleds over wetted sand or wooden rollers can move impressive loads, but possible in small-scale experiment differs vastly from accomplishing the same task 2 million times over 2 decades. The ramps theorized to raise blocks to growing heights present engineering challenges that multiply with the pyramid's increasing size. A straight ramp to the pyramid's peak would need to be nearly 2 kilometers long to maintain a workable slope, requiring more material than the pyramid itself. A spiral ramp wrapping around the pyramid's exterior could work, but would obscure the corners, making it difficult to maintain the precise angles and dimensions. Internal ramps might have existed within the structure, but this theory requires the pyramid's internal layout to accommodate ramp spaces later filled in, and evidence for such spaces remains contested. Some researchers propose combinations of different ramp types for different construction phases, external ramps for lower courses, spiral or internal ramps higher up, shifting strategies as circumstances demanded. Recent theories suggest the blocks may have been cast in place, rather than quarried and transported, that workers used wooden moulds and poured a concrete-like mixture of limestone particles and mineral binders to form each block. This would solve transportation problems, but creates new mysteries about chemical composition and why the blocks appear identical to natural limestone under most analysis. Proponents point to internal bubbles and organic remains they claim could not exist in natural limestone. Opponents note the theory requires chemical knowledge not otherwise evidenced in ancient Egypt and fails to explain the granite elements. The astronomical alignments add another layer of precision to the mystery. The pyramid's sides face the cardinal directions with remarkable accuracy, likely achieved by observing stars and using the sun's shadow to establish true north. The diagonal from corner to corner aligns with true north even more precisely than the sides, suggesting deliberate astronomical orientation. Some researchers argue the 3 main pyramids of Giza match the pattern of stars in Orion's belt, that the pyramids represent a terrestrial map of celestial realms, though this theory remains controversial and requires selective interpretation of distances and orientations. Inside the pyramid, the mathematical and geometric sophistication continues. The ratio of the pyramid's perimeter to its height approximates 2 pi, the ratio fundamental to circular geometry. Whether this represents deliberate encoding of mathematical knowledge or coincidental result of chosen proportions remains debated. The diagonal of the base relates to the height through the golden ratio, another mathematically significant relationship. The king's chamber's dimensions incorporate ratios found throughout sacred geometry, though again we cannot determine intention from coincidence without written records explaining the builder's mathematical thinking. The scale of coordination required staggers comprehension. Tens of thousands of workers needed feeding, housing, medical care, payment in bread and beer, organization into work gangs and specialist teams, quarrymen, transporters, engineers, surveyors, priests conducting rituals, administrators tracking deliveries and work assignments, all functioning as integrated system for decades. The social organization this implies, the bureaucratic record-keeping, the economic surplus to support non-agricultural workers, all of this marks Egypt's Old Kingdom a civilization operating at remarkable complexity. Yet after the Great Pyramid building age ended, Egyptian construction never again attempted such massive projects. Later pyramids were smaller, built less carefully, often collapsed or deteriorated rapidly. The knowledge and organizational capacity that created Khufu's pyramids seemed to fade, suggesting these achievements represented peak effort, maximum application of resources and skill that could not be sustained indefinitely. Or perhaps later pharaohs chose different ways to assert their power and ensure their afterlife, found pyramid building too costly in resources and lives for the benefits it provided. Modern engineers examining the pyramids express respect mixed with puzzlement. We could build equivalent structures today, but only with technology completely different from what ancient Egyptians possessed. We would use steel and concrete, powered machinery, computer-aided design, laser guidance systems. Replicating the pyramids using only ancient technologies would require relearning lost techniques, rediscovering methods that worked but were never recorded in ways we can access. The pyramids stand as proof that sophisticated results do not require sophisticated technology in our sense, that human determination and ingenuity can overcome seemingly impossible challenges. The Great Pyramid endures while the civilization that built it has transformed beyond recognition. The pharaohs are dust, their names preserved, but their thoughts and exact methods lost. The pyramid remains, imperfect testament to what humans can achieve when will and resources align, when thousands labor towards single vision, when precision matters enough to spend decades getting details right. It asks us to respect capabilities we cannot fully explain, to acknowledge that our ancestors were not primitive versions of ourselves, but fully intelligent people who solved problems we have never faced using methods we've partially forgotten. From the engineered permanence of stone pyramids, we turn now to something far more fragile, to people who vanished so completely that we cannot determine whether they died or simply walked away into new identities. In the year 1587, 115 English colonists arrived on Roanoke Island off the coast of what would become North Carolina, attempting to establish the first permanent English settlement in the New World. They came with supplies, tools, dreams of prosperity and a land they barely understood, led by John White, who served as governor and artist, documenting the indigenous peoples and landscapes they encountered. Among the colonists was White's daughter Eleanor and her husband, and shortly after arrival, Eleanor gave birth to Virginia Dare, the first English child born in the Americas. The colony represented English ambition to compete with Spanish colonial expansion, to find wealth, to establish foothold in territories Spain claimed but could not fully control. But the timing proved catastrophic. Supplies ran low, relations with local indigenous peoples grew tense, and the colonists convinced John White to return to England for additional provisions and reinforcements. White departed in late 1587, leaving his family and the other colonists on Roanoke with promises to return swiftly. He could not have anticipated the delays that would trap him in England for 3 years. War between England and Spain made Atlantic crossings desperately dangerous. Ships were commandeered for military service. Private vessels dared not risk Spanish warships prowling sea lanes. White watched months become years, his anguish growing, unable to return to the colony he had left, to the daughter and granddaughter waiting across an ocean that became impassable. When White finally returned in August 1590, he found the settlement abandoned. Houses stood empty, dismantled in orderly fashion rather than destroyed. The colonists had clearly left deliberately, not fled in panic. But where had they gone? The only clue appeared carved into a post, the word Croatoan, name of both a nearby island and the indigenous people who inhabited it. White had previously arranged with the colonists that if they left Roanoke they should carve their destination, and if they left under duress they should add a Maltese cross. No cross appeared with Croatoan, suggesting voluntary relocation. But storms prevented White from sailing to Croatoan Island immediately, and circumstances conspired to force his ship back to England before he could investigate further. He never returned to the New World, never learned what happened to his family and the others, died without knowing their fate. The mystery deepens with every investigation. Croatoan Island, later called Hatteras, seemed the obvious destination, a place where colonists might have joined the friendly Croatoan people. Some archaeological evidence on Hatteras suggests European presence in the late 16th century, including items possibly from the colony. But no clear confirmation exists, no burial ground with English artifacts, no definitive proof the colonists lived and integrated there. Perhaps they arrived and were absorbed into indigenous communities so completely that their English identity dissolved within a generation, their descendants indistinguishable from the people who adopted them. Other theories point inland to areas around the Chowan River or the Chesapeake Bay, where indigenous accounts collected decades later mentioned people with light hair and grey eyes, people who lived in stone houses, people who claimed descent from those who came from the sea. Could some colonists have travelled inland, sought refuge with indigenous groups farther from the coast, established themselves in communities that later moved or were destroyed by warfare and disease? The region's indigenous peoples faced catastrophic disruptions in subsequent decades, European diseases spreading faster than Europeans themselves, political alliances shifting, conflict erupting. Communities that existed in 1590 might have vanished completely by the time systematic investigation began. The Spanish archives hold tantalizing references. Spanish authorities in St. Augustine knew of the English colony and viewed it as threat to Spanish claims. Some Spanish documents reference expeditions to locate and destroy the settlement, though whether these succeeded, reached Roanoke, found anyone there, remains unclear from fragmentary records. Did Spanish soldiers attack the colony, kill or capture the English, remove all evidence to hide the massacre? The Spanish had reason to eliminate English presence, but also reason to trumpet such victory, yet no clear Spanish account of destroying Roanoke exists in archives examined so far. Disease offers another grim possibility. European diseases devastated indigenous American populations who lacked immunity. But Europeans also suffered from diseases present in the Americas, unfamiliar ailments to which they had no resistance. Malnutrition that weakened immune systems, making them vulnerable to infections, easily survived in healthier times. Perhaps illness swept through the colony, left the survivors too weak to maintain the settlement, forced them to seek help from indigenous peoples, or attempt desperate journey to the Chesapeake, where they hoped other English might eventually arrive. An epidemic could explain orderly departure, people who knew they were dying making decisions about how to spend their final days. Famine speaks quietly in the background. The colonists arrived too late to plant crops that year, depended on indigenous trade for food, strained those relationships through misunderstandings and demands. If trade ceased, if indigenous peoples could not or would not share increasingly scarce resources, the colonists faced starvation. They might have scattered to different indigenous communities, small groups more easily absorbed and fed than the whole settlement together, planned to reunite later but never managed the reunion. archaeological evidence suggests the late 1580s brought severe drought to the region, springs drying up, crops failing, everyone struggling to survive. Recent genetic studies of indigenous peoples in the region have found markers suggesting European ancestry predating later colonial contact, tantalizing hints that Roanoke colonists might have descendants among the Lumbee and other tribes, their genes persisting while their stories faded. But genetics alone cannot tell us what happened, cannot distinguish peaceful integration from other possibilities, cannot speak to the experiences of people who lived and loved and lost in ways no DNA sequence can record. The very completeness of the disappearance haunts investigators. If massacre, where are the bodies, the signs of violence? If integration, why no clearer indigenous oral traditions about the English who joined them? If disease, why no mass graves? If journey to another location, why did no one ever make contact with later English expeditions to the region? The colonists vanished as thoroughly as if the earth swallowed them, leaving only that single carved word, a signpost pointing toward answers that dissolve like morning mist when approached. John White's watercolours survive, delicate paintings of the land and peoples he encountered. Images of his granddaughter Virginia we do not possess, because she disappeared before anyone could paint her portrait. She would have been 3 years old when the colony relocated or perished, possibly the first English child to be absorbed into indigenous American culture, or the first to die on American soil and be buried in an unmarked grave. Her fate and the fate of the others represents 115 individual mysteries, 115 stories that ended without witness, without record, without the closure that memory provides. The Lost Colony teaches us how easily people can vanish when circumstances overwhelm documentation, when disaster strikes small communities far from centres of power that maintain detailed records. In our documented age, we imagine disappearances impossible, but 5 centuries ago, groups of people could simply cease to exist in the historical record, their lives continuing perhaps, but their connection to official history severed completely. Roanoke reminds us that absence of evidence creates mysteries that persistence of investigation may never solve, that some questions, no matter how desperately we wish answers, may echo unanswered through centuries. From people who vanished into the American wilderness, we turn our attention across an ocean to France, to a prisoner whose very face was hidden from history, whose identity became the subject of centuries of speculation and royal intrigue. In the fortress of Pignerol in 1670s France, then in other prisons across subsequent decades, there existed a prisoner of unusual status. He was held in relative comfort, given good food and clothing, treated with respect by his guards, but forbidden all contact with the outside world and required at all times when anyone might see him to wear a mask. Historical accounts disagree on the mask's material. Some say black velvet rather than iron, but agree on its purpose: to conceal the prisoner's face so completely that no one could identify him. This mysterious captive moved between prisons for over 3 decades, always under the care of the same jailer, Benin d'Auvergne de Saint-Maz, always surrounded by extraordinary secrecy. When the prisoner died in the Bastille in 1703, his possessions were destroyed, his cell scraped clean, even the furniture removed and burned, every trace of his existence erased as thoroughly as possible. Who was this man whose face could not be shown? Why did King Louis XIV, the Sun King at the height of his absolute power, keep this prisoner in such peculiar circumstances? The mystery sparked speculation immediately and has never ceased. Writers and historians have proposed dozens of candidates, each theory illuminating different aspects of French politics and royal intrigue, none completely explaining all the known facts. The most romantic theory identifies the prisoner as Louis XIV's older twin brother, hidden to prevent succession disputes that could tear France apart. In this narrative, the king's mother, Anne of Austria, gave birth to identical twins, but keeping both would create impossible problems. Which was truly the elder? Which should inherit the throne? Rather than risk civil war between supporters of twin claimants, one was secretly imprisoned, given comfortable existence but denied freedom, his face hidden so no one could note the resemblance to the king. This theory inspired Alexandre Dumas to write his famous novel, and captures imagination with its dramatic implications. But historians find no credible evidence of twin birth. Court records were too detailed, too many witnesses attended royal births. Concealing such secret would have required impossible conspiracy of silence. Another candidate is Ercole Mattioli, an Italian diplomat who betrayed Louis XIV during negotiations over the fortress of Casale. Louis had offered money for Casale. Mattioli conveyed the offer, but then secretly informed Spain and Austria, France's rivals, allowing them to counter the French offer. Louis, discovering the betrayal, had Mattioli kidnapped from Italian territory and imprisoned. This theory aligns with known facts about Saint-Mars prisoners and timing, but struggles to explain why an Italian diplomat's face needed concealing, why such extreme secrecy surrounded someone whose betrayal was known. Diplomatic incident. Some historians propose the prisoner was Eustache Dauger, a valet arrested for unknown crimes and imprisoned under circumstances matching the masked prisoner's treatment. Documents show Saint-Mars received a prisoner named Dauger, with orders to guard him carefully, allow no communication, conceal his face. But who Dauger was, what crime he committed, why his identity mattered so intensely, remains unclear. Perhaps he was not important himself, but knew secrets too dangerous to risk him speaking, served some noble or royal personage, and witnessed something that required eternal silence. A darker theory suggests the prisoner might have been the real father of Louis XIV, that Louis XIII was not actually the Sun King's father, that Anne of Austria conceived with another man to secure the succession after years of childless marriage. If this were true, and if the biological father later attempted to claim recognition or make demands, Louis might imprison him, unable to execute someone related by blood, but unwilling to risk the legitimacy questions that acknowledging him would raise. This theory requires believing in conspiracy at the highest levels, deception maintained across decades, motivations of shame and dynastic preservation overwhelming normal family feeling. Other proposals include a duke's illegitimate son, a disgraced general, an English nobleman involved in plots against William of Orange, even a woman disguised as male prisoner to hide gender along with identity. Each theory finds some support in fragmentary documents, hints in memoirs, suspicious gaps in official records, but none achieves certainty. The French monarchy kept excellent records of many things, but maintained silence about this prisoner that seems deliberate, a whole shaped like a secret that authorities work to preserve. What we know with confidence is limited but suggestive. The prisoner existed, moved between facilities, died in Bastille and was buried under the name Marchioli, probably a false name. Saint-Mars treated him with unusual attention, suggesting the prisoner was high status or new information requiring careful containment. The mask, whether iron or velvet, served to prevent identification by guards, servants, anyone who came near. This implies the prisoner's face was potentially recognizable, that he resembled someone known, or bore features that would prompt questions. The sustained secrecy over decades suggests something more than ordinary criminality or simple political imprisonment. The psychology of such imprisonment deserves consideration. To live for over 30 years unable to show your face, forbidden to speak with others about anything meaningful, knowing you will never be free regardless of behavior, this constitutes torture of a subtle kind. The prisoner maintained sanity somehow, lived to approximately 60 years old, endured conditions that might have broken others. What thoughts sustained him? Did he hope for release that never came? Did he rage against injustice or accept his fate? Did he even fully understand why this happened to him? The mask symbolizes not just hidden identity, but the obliteration of personhood, the reduction of a human being to a secret that must be kept. Louis XIV's court was a theatre of power, everything calculated for effect, every gesture carrying meaning. The king chose to keep this prisoner alive, chose particular conditions of imprisonment, chose secrecy so extreme it invited speculation. Was the mystery itself part of the intention? A demonstration that the king possessed secrets even his closest advisers could not penetrate, that his power extended to making people disappear into living death? Or was the secrecy pragmatic, prevention of scandal or political complication that would have harmed France's interests or the king's legitimacy? The prisoner's possessions were destroyed, his cell purged, because objects carry memory and might prompt recognition. A monogram on a shirt, a distinctive possession, anything might give clue to identity. But despite these precautions, despite sustained effort to erase this man from history, the mystery itself proved indelible. By trying so hard to conceal, the authorities ensured that later generations would wonder endlessly, that the prisoner would become more famous in death than he possibly could have been in life. Perhaps the ultimate answer lies in the very nature of absolute monarchy. When a single person possesses power to imprison anyone indefinitely without trial or explanation, when there exists no check on royal authority, no requirement for public justification, mysteries like this become inevitable. The prisoner could be kept because the king willed it, the secrecy maintained because no one dared question royal decision. In such system, answers matter less than obedience. Truth becomes whatever the sovereign declares it to be. The man in the mask remains a ghost haunting French history, a person reduced to mystery, a face hidden so successfully that we will likely never perceive its features. He reminds us that power operates partially through what it conceals, that secrets kept by the powerful can outlive the regimes that created them. We leave the Bastille's shadows and travel back further in time to monuments that have puzzled humanity for millennia. Stones arranged according to purposes we struggle to fully comprehend. On Salisbury Plain in southern England stands a monument that predates writing in Britain, a circular arrangement of massive stones that has witnessed 50 centuries of human history. Stonehenge appears deceptively simple from distance, stones standing in rings and horseshoe patterns, but approaching reveals complexity that defies easy explanation. The outer ring consists of sarsen stones, each weighing approximately 25 tons, transported from Marlborough Downs some 30 kilometres away. These stones stand upright, topped by horizontal lintels fitted with mortise and tenon joints, woodworking techniques executed in stone with precision that speaks to sophisticated understanding of engineering and architecture. Inside the sarsen circle stands a horseshoe arrangement of even larger trilithons, two uprights supporting a lintel, creating dramatic doorways to nowhere. And within this arrangement sit the bluestones, smaller megaliths that came from Preseli Hills in Wales, over 200 kilometres distant, transported by methods we can only theorise. The construction occurred in stages across approximately 1500 years, beginning around 3100 BC with a circular ditch and bank, simple earthwork that established sacred space. Later generations added timber structures. Then around 2600 BC began erecting the stones. First, the blue stones in some arrangement we cannot reconstruct, because later modifications moved them. Finally, the massive sarsen circle and trilithons around 2500 BC. This extended construction timeline suggests Stonehenge held sustained importance for cultures across centuries, that each generation inherited and elaborated a sacred site, whose meaning evolved but remained significant. Why bring bluestones from Wales? The sarsens were difficult enough. Massive stones that required hundreds of workers to move using sledges, rollers, ropes, organised effort on a scale that implies chiefdom or early state-level organisation. But the Welsh bluestones, each weighing up to 4 tons, came from specific outcrops in Preseli Hills, not the nearest available stone but particular rock chosen for reasons beyond pure practicality. Some researchers argue glaciers transported the stones naturally, depositing them within easier reach of Salisbury Plain, but geological evidence suggests glaciers never reached the necessary locations. More likely, human communities transported these stones, perhaps by rolling them to the sea, floating them on rafts around the coast and up rivers, then hauling them overland for the final distance. This journey represents extraordinary effort, months or years of labour by substantial workforce, all to bring specific stones to specific location. The implication is that these stones mattered spiritually or symbolically, that their particular origin carried meaning. Perhaps the bluestones came from quarries already considered sacred, that incorporating them into Stonehenge transferred sanctity from one place to another, united different regions through shared monument. Or perhaps the stone itself was believed to possess properties, healing powers or spiritual resonance that justified the immense effort of transport. We know these were not primitive people acting on whims. Neolithic Britons were farmers with sophisticated understanding of astronomy, mathematics, social organisation, capable of multi-generational projects requiring sustained cooperation. The astronomical alignments of Stonehenge provoke endless debate and speculation. The monument's axis aligns with the sunset of the winter solstice and the sunrise of the summer solstice, the most obvious intentional orientation. On summer solstice, the sun rises directly over the heel stone when viewed from the centre, a dramatic natural phenomenon that thousands of modern visitors gather to witness each year. But was Stonehenge primarily an astronomical observatory? Some researchers see complex calendrical functions, argue the stone positions mark lunar cycles, eclipses, stellar positions, encode astronomical knowledge in permanent form. Others caution against overinterpretation, note that any arrangement of stones will align with something in the sky by chance, that we must be careful not to project our modern understanding of astronomy onto ancient motivations. Recent archaeological work has revealed Stonehenge as part of larger ceremonial landscape. Durrington Walls, a massive henge monument less than 3 kilometres away, may have been a settlement for people participating in ceremonies at Stonehenge. The Cursus, a long earthwork running east-west north of Stonehenge, served purposes we can only guess. Avenues connected these sites, processional ways along which people moved during rituals we can no longer witness. The entire landscape was shaped for ceremonies that unfolded over days or seasons, Stonehenge functioning as one element in larger sacred geography. Cremated human remains have been found at Stonehenge, burials dating to its earliest phases, suggesting the site served as cemetery for elite individuals, or perhaps those who died in service to the monument's construction. Were these ancestors of the community, their bones interred in sacred ground to maintain spiritual connection? Or were they sacrifices, offerings to gods or forces we cannot name? The bones show no signs of violence. People died natural deaths, or through means that left no skeletal evidence, then were cremated and their ashes carefully deposited within the monument's bounds. The acoustic properties of Stonehenge add another dimension to speculation. The stones create unusual acoustic environment, reflecting and amplifying sound in ways that might have enhanced ritual performances. Modern experiments with sound at the site reveal that drums, singing, or instrumental music would resonate strangely, creating effects that could seem supernatural to people without scientific understanding of acoustics. Perhaps ceremonies at Stonehenge involved sound as much as sight, that the stones served as architecture for ritual soundscapes designed to create transcendent experiences. Theories about Stonehenge's purpose multiply precisely because the monument could serve multiple functions simultaneously. It might have been astronomical observatory and temple, and cemetery and meeting place, and political statement all at once, different aspects emphasized by different generations across its long construction and use period. Or perhaps its original purpose became lost even to later Neolithic peoples, who continued to treat it as sacred without fully remembering why. Mystery clings to sacred sites. The not quite knowing becomes part of the numinous quality that marks space as special. The monument's alignment with solstices suggests deep connection to agricultural cycles. Neolithic farmers depended on understanding seasons, knowing when to plant and harvest, anticipating the year's rhythm. The solstices mark turning points, moments when sun's apparent motion along the horizon reverses, winter beginning its yield to summer, or summer starting its decline toward winter. For agricultural peoples, these moments held profound significance, and marking them with permanent monument makes practical and spiritual sense. Stonehenge might have been calendar in stone, reliable marker of seasonal time, ensuring that planting happened at optimal moments, that ceremonies occurred at cosmologically appropriate times. But practical function alone seems insufficient to explain the effort invested. Something about Stonehenge transcended utility, entered realm of meaning that we struggle to access across such temporal distance. The monument declared something about the people who built it, their power, their devotion, their place in the cosmos. It created center point, axis mundi, where Earth touched something beyond itself, where ordinary human activity intersected with sacred time and space. Standing within the stone circle, looking up at these massive megaliths, understanding the effort they represent, one feels the weight of intentionality, this sense that this place meant something profound to those who shaped it. Modern visitors continue to find Stonehenge meaningful, though their meanings differ vastly from whatever Neolithic builders intended. Druids claim connection, though historical Druids came millennia after Stonehenge's construction. New Age practitioners see it as PowerPoint or energy nexus. Tourists photograph it as bucket list destination. Archaeologists study it as window into prehistoric society. Each group projects onto these silent stones their own interpretations, their own needs for connection to past or to something beyond ordinary experience. In this sense, Stonehenge continues to function, as it perhaps always did, as focal point for human meaning-making, physical structure that anchors spiritual or intellectual inquiry. The monument will likely never yield all its secrets. The people who built it left no writing. Their oral traditions died with languages we cannot reconstruct, their motivations and beliefs accessible only through material remains that inevitably underdetermine interpretation. We can measure the stones, calculate the effort, analyze the artifacts, but we cannot enter the minds of people 5,000 years dead, cannot feel what they felt standing where we now stand. Stonehenge remains a monument to human capacity for creating meaning, for investing enormous effort into projects whose purposes transcend simple survival, for reaching towards something beyond the immediate and practical. From these ancient stones on Salisbury Plain, we journey westward across the Atlantic to a legend that has captivated imaginations for 2 millennia, to a lost civilization that may never have existed or might rest beneath ocean waves. In the dialogues of Plato, written in the 4th century BC, appears one of history's most enduring legends. The philosopher describes Atlantis in 2 works, Timaeus and Critias, presenting it as a powerful island nation that existed 9,000 years before his time, beyond the Pillars of Hercules in the Atlantic Ocean. According to Plato, Atlantis was larger than Libya and Asia Minor combined, possessed advanced technology, commanded vast empire, and challenged Athens militarily before catastrophic destruction sank it beneath the waves in a single day and night of earthquakes and floods. The Athenians, Plato claims, defeated the Atlantean invasion, but both civilizations suffered in the cataclysm that followed. This story comes to Plato third hand, he says, transmitted from Solon, who heard it from Egyptian priests who preserved ancient knowledge in their temple records. The question that has vexed scholars for 24 centuries is simple. Did Plato intend Atlantis as history or allegory? His dialogues typically use fictional scenarios to illustrate philosophical points, the Republic's cave allegory being the most famous example. Was Atlantis merely a thought experiment about ideal societies and their corruption? Plato describes Atlantis as initially virtuous, founded by Poseidon, organized according to perfect principles, but gradually degenerating as the divine nature in their bloodline diluted with a mortal admixture, becoming hubristic and aggressive. This narrative fits Plato's philosophical concerns about how societies decline, how luxury and power corrupt virtue. Perhaps Atlantis was always meant as moral tale rather than historical claim, but Plato presents the story differently than his obvious allegories. He insists repeatedly on its truth, has Critias swear the account is genuine history, provides detailed measurements and descriptions that seem meant to convey factual information rather than symbolic meanings. The level of concrete detail, the specific numbers, the geographical precision, these suggest Plato wanted readers to consider Atlantis as historical possibility. Was he embellishing a real story he believed he'd received, adding details to make the narrative more vivid while maintaining faith in its core truth? Ancient readers took the account seriously. Many classical authors referenced Atlantis as real place, debated its location, and fate, rather than dismissing it as philosophical fiction. If Atlantis existed, where might it have been? Plato places it beyond the Pillars of Hercules, the Strait of Gibraltar in the Atlantic Ocean. Taken literally, this suggests mid-Atlantic location, and some enthusiasts propose Atlantis was a now submerged landmass, perhaps the Azores Plateau or some vanished island. Geological reality complicates this theory. The mid-Atlantic is oceanic crust formed by spreading ridges. No continental landmass has existed there within human history. No mechanism could sink an island continent in the timeframes Plato describes. The ocean floor preserves its history well, and it shows no evidence of vanished Atlantis in the Atlantic. More plausible theories relocate Atlantis to the Mediterranean or adjacent areas, suggesting Plato or his sources confused directions or exaggerated distances. The Minoan civilization on Crete and Santorini flourished in the Bronze Age and collapsed catastrophically around 1600 BC, when Santorini's volcano erupted in one of history's most powerful explosions. The eruption generated tsunamis, buried Akrotiri on Santorini under ash, may have destabilized Minoan civilization, which declined rapidly afterward. Could garbled memories of this event, transmitted through Egyptian sources and distorted over a millennium, have become Plato's Atlantis? The parallels are striking. Advanced island civilization, catastrophic natural disaster, collapse within short time period. Adjusting Plato's time frame from 9,000 to 900 years before Solon would place the destruction at approximately the right period. But Minoan Crete does not match Plato's descriptions in many details. The geography is wrong, the scale is wrong. Crete never threatened Athens militarily because Athens barely existed as significant power during Minoan height. Perhaps the Santorini eruption inspired Plato's narrative without Atlantis being Crete specifically, natural disaster serving as template onto which he projected his philosophical concerns about societal decline and divine punishment. Other candidates emerge from archaeology and geology. Some researchers propose the Black Sea, arguing that catastrophic flooding when Mediterranean waters broke through into a lower Black Sea basin might have destroyed coastal civilizations and inspired flood legends, including Atlantis. The flooding occurred much earlier than Plato's time frame, but could have persisted in cultural memory for millennia. Others look to Spain, to underwater formations near the Strait of Gibraltar that some interpret as man-made structures, though mainstream archaeology sees only natural geology. More exotic theories place Atlantis in Antarctica, imagining ice-free Antarctic civilization before the continent glaciated, or in the Americas, interpreting various pre-Columbian sites as Atlantean remnants. These theories require rejecting vast amounts of established geological and archaeological knowledge, positing civilizations for which we have no credible evidence, and generally serve more as entertainment than serious scholarship. The mystery of Atlantis attracts speculation partially because conclusive disproof is difficult. One can always argue that the real Atlantis lies in some yet unexplored location, that future discoveries will vindicate the legend. Perhaps the most important aspect of Atlantis is not whether it existed, but why the idea persists so powerfully. Humans are drawn to lost civilizations, to the notion that previous ages achieved sophistication equal or superior to our own before catastrophe erased their accomplishments. This pattern recurs across cultures: the golden age in the past, the fall from grace, the lost wisdom. Atlantis serves as vessel for these recurring mythological structures, becomes whatever any given age needs it to be. Warning about hubris, repository of ancient knowledge, proof that mainstream history is incomplete. The legend influences how we think about the past and about civilization's fragility. If advanced societies can vanish so completely that only legends remain, what does that suggest about our own civilization's permanence? Atlantis reminds us that cultural achievements are not guaranteed to persist, that knowledge can be lost, that catastrophe, natural or self-inflicted, can erase centuries of progress. In this sense, Whether Atlantis existed matters less than what the story communicates about impermanence and the work required to preserve what we value. Plato may have intended Atlantis as philosophical device, but the story escaped his control and became myth in the deepest sense, a narrative that shapes how people understand their world and their past. Atlantis joins other great mysteries in the realm where history and imagination blur, where facts cannot fully constrain the human need for meaningful stories. Perhaps someday archaeological discovery will definitively connect or disconnect the legend to some actual Bronze Age civilization. Until then, Atlantis remains simultaneously everywhere and nowhere, lost in time and preserved in imagination, a cautionary tale about the impermanence of human achievement and the endurance of human storytelling. We surface from Atlantis's mythical depths and return to dry land, to a very real mystery drawn across desert sands, to lines and figures that beg questions about why ancient peoples created images meant to be seen from heights they could not reach. In the arid plains of southern Peru, stretching across nearly 500 square kilometers of desert, lies one of archaeology's most perplexing achievements. The Nazca Lines consist of hundreds of geometric shapes, straight lines extending for kilometers, and enormous figures depicting animals, plants, and abstract forms, all created by removing the reddish pebbles that cover the desert surface to reveal lighter ground beneath. The lines are ancient, created by the Nazca culture between 400 BC and 650 AD, but they remain remarkably preserved because this region receives almost no rainfall, ranking among Earth's driest places. What makes the lines mysterious is their scale and perspective. Many figures are hundreds of meters across, properly visible only from the air, yet the Nazca had no flying technology that we know of. Why create images you cannot fully perceive? The figures demonstrate remarkable sophistication. The hummingbird spans 96 meters, the monkey 110 meters, the spider 47 meters, each rendered with continuous lines that never break, requiring planning and execution that seems impossible without aerial view. The geometric forms include triangles, trapezoids, spirals, and perfectly straight lines that run for kilometers over hills and valleys without deviating, suggesting the Nazca possessed surveying techniques and organizational capacity we have underestimated. Creating these lines required moving thousands of tons of stones, sustaining work crews, implementing designs that existed in someone's imagination, or on some medium we no longer possess. Initial European discovery of the lines came when commercial airlines began flying over Peru in the 1920s and 1930s. Pilots noticing strange markings visible from the air, passengers seeing patterns the people below could not perceive. Ground-level observation reveals only scattered stones and slight changes in surface color. Walking across a Nazca figure without knowing it exists is entirely possible. This aerial perspective dependency has fueled countless theories about how and why the lines were created, with proposals ranging from sensible archaeology to wild speculation about extraterrestrial intervention. The most straightforward explanations focus on the religious and ceremonial purposes. The Nazca people practiced elaborate rituals. Their pottery depicts shamanic figures and supernatural beings. Their culture centered on water management in an environment where rain was precious and unpredictable. Perhaps the lines served as paths for ritual processions, routes along which communities walked during ceremonies invoking gods of water and fertility. The straight lines could connect sacred spaces. The animal figures might represent constellations or gods, the entire complex functioning as landscape-scale temple where walking the lines constituted prayer or ceremonial action. One need not see the entire figure to participate in ritual tracing its outline, and perhaps full perception was not the point. The act of creation and ritual use mattering more than visual appreciation. Astronomical theories propose the lines mark celestial events, point towards sunrise or sunset on solstices and equinoxes, track the movements of stars and planets important to agricultural timing. Some lines do align with astronomical phenomena, though whether this is intentional or coincidental remains debated. With hundreds of lines pointing in many directions, some alignments with celestial events are statistically inevitable, and distinguishing meaningful astronomical orientation from chance requires careful analysis that does not always produce clear answers. The Nazca surely observed the heavens. All ancient agricultural societies did. But whether the lines function primarily as astronomical instruments, or whether celestial considerations were secondary to other purposes, we cannot determine with certainty. Water-related theories note that the Nazca region depends on underground aquifers and seasonal rivers, successful agriculture requiring intimate knowledge of where water exists below ground. Some researchers propose the lines map water sources, that trapezoids and triangles point toward aquifers, that the Nazca created the lines as functional water maps visible from hills surrounding the plain. This theory connects to practical needs, makes the lines simultaneously ceremonial and utilitarian, sacred because water is sacred in desert environments. The act of creating lines toward water sources could itself be ritual action, prayer made physical, hope for rain and successful harvest expressed through massive collective effort. Recent interpretations emphasize the social and political functions the lines might have served. Creating these figures required mobilizing large labor forces, coordinating across communities, sustaining workers during construction. These projects demonstrated power, allowed leaders to organize populations toward shared goals, created monuments that declared Nazca presence and cultural achievement. The lines might have functioned like medieval cathedrals, their construction as important as their completed form, the process of building, creating social cohesion, and affirming hierarchy. Gathering to work on the lines could have been festive occasion, seasonal events where communities celebrated identity while modifying their landscape. The question of aerial viewing persists despite terrestrial explanations. How did the Nazca design these enormous figures? Small-scale models could be scaled up through systematic measurement and coordinated work crews using stakes and ropes. Possible, certainly, but requiring mathematical understanding and organizational sophistication we must credit to the Nazca. Some researchers have suggested hot air balloons, noting that Nazca textiles are tightly woven enough to potentially serve as balloon fabric, that the culture had access to fire, that pottery shows possible balloon-like designs. No definitive archaeological evidence of ballooning exists, but absence of evidence is not evidence of absence in cultures whose organic materials rarely survive. Whether the Nazca actually flew, even in primitive balloons, remains speculation, but the theory addresses the design problem in ways ground-level surveying struggles to explain. Another possibility is that the figures were never meant for human eyes at all, that they were created for the gods, that aerial perspective belongs to supernatural observers rather than terrestrial viewers. Many religious traditions create offerings or structures meant for divine rather than human perception, and the Nazca might have understood that their gods viewed the world from above, that creating images visible from the sky was the point precisely because humans could not fully see them. The incompleteness of human perception would then be feature rather than bug, acknowledgement of divine perspective that transcends mortal limitations. Modern threats to the Nazca Lines include climate change bringing rare but devastating rain events, human intrusion from mining and development, and ironically tourism, with vehicles occasionally damaging lines when drivers stray from designated areas. The lines persist because of extraordinary natural preservation, the desert's dryness protecting them for 1,500 years, but they remain fragile, vulnerable to disruptions that could erase in minutes what took generations to create. The Nazca Lines remind us that cultures express themselves through landscape modification, that humans throughout history have shaped their environments according to beliefs and needs we can only partially reconstruct. The lines are simultaneously art and ritual, message and map, practical and transcendent. They testify to the human impulse to create meaning at scale, to inscribe purpose into the earth itself, to declare through massive effort that we exist, that we matter, that our relationship with this land and these gods warrants permanent expression. Perhaps future research will clarify the lines' exact functions, connect them definitively to specific rituals or astronomical observations, explain the technical methods of their creation. Or perhaps they will remain productively mysterious, monuments that invite interpretation without demanding single correct understanding. The Nazca Lines offer us an image of our ancestors as capable of sophisticated thought and monumental action, as people whose mental lives were as rich as our own, who looked at desert plains and saw opportunity for creating something extraordinary that would outlast them and puzzle civilizations they could not imagine. As we stand conceptually above the Nazca Plains, looking down at lines drawn in earth and time, we prepare to conclude our journey through these 10 mysteries, to reflect on what they teach us about history, knowledge, and the enduring power of unanswered questions. We've travelled through time tonight, from the abandoned cities of the Maya to the desert drawings of the Nazca, from vanished treasure rooms to prisoners whose faces could not be shown, from monuments of stone to books in unreadable languages. 10 mysteries, 10 questions that centuries of investigation have not fully answered, 10 reminders that the past keeps its secrets well, and that human history contains more puzzles than solutions. As our journey reaches its end, as the night deepens around us and these stories settle into memory, we might pause to consider what these mysteries teach us beyond their specific enigmas. The first lesson concerns humility. We live in an age that prizes answers, that approaches every question with confidence that sufficient research, proper methodology, adequate technology will yield solutions. The mysteries we have explored tonight resist this optimism, remind us that some questions may be fundamentally unanswerable, that the evidence required for certainty has been destroyed by time, lost in catastrophes, deliberately hidden, or never existed in accessible form. The Maya vanished into jungle and silence, taking their reasons with them. The Voynich manuscript speaks in language we cannot crack, despite computers and cryptographic sophistication. Atlantis may be fiction that we search for as fact, or reality we have misidentified as fiction. These mysteries humble us, demonstrate the limits of even our advanced investigative methods. But humility need not become despair. The second lesson these mysteries teach is about the value of not knowing, the intellectual richness that uncertainty generates. Each mystery has spawned libraries of speculation, theories building on theories, interpretations multiplying as scholars approach from different angles with different assumptions. This proliferation of ideas is not failure, it is feature. the mystery functioning as generative space where imagination and analysis interplay. We think differently about ancient capabilities after contemplating the Antikythera mechanism. Reconsider what technology means when confronted with precision achieved without computers. We examine our assumptions about social organization when calculating the effort required for Stonehenge or the pyramids. Mystery makes us creative, forces us beyond conventional frameworks, invites us to imagine possibilities we would otherwise dismiss. The mysteries also speak to human persistence, the determination to create, to build, to make marks that outlast individual lives. Every mystery we have explored tonight began as human action, people making choices about what mattered enough to invest enormous effort, to sustain projects across generations, to leave evidence even when they could not know how future peoples would interpret their work. The Nazca drawing their lines across desert, the Egyptians stacking stone toward the sky, the creator of the Voynich manuscript carefully inscribing page after page in indecipherable script, all of them reached towards something beyond immediate survival, created meanings that transcended simple utility. This is fundamentally hopeful, evidence that humans throughout time have believed that what they do matters, that their actions carry significance worth preserving. At the same time, these mysteries remind us of impermanence, how thoroughly civilizations can vanish, how completely knowledge can be lost. The builders of Stonehenge left no written records. Their understanding of their own monument died with their language, their descendants inheriting only the stones without the meanings. The Amber Room, just decades gone, has vanished as thoroughly as if it existed millennia ago, modern documentation and photography insufficient to prevent mystery. If we can lose track of a treasure room within living memory, how much more has been lost from ages that kept fewer records, societies that transmitted culture orally, catastrophes that destroyed libraries and temples, and the accumulated knowledge they contained. This impermanence suggests responsibility for our own time, awareness that what seems obvious and permanent to us might become mysterious to future generations if we fail to preserve context and explanation. We are simultaneously inheritors of mysteries we cannot solve, and creators of the context that future peoples will either understand or puzzle over. How we document our motivations, preserve our knowledge, explain our monuments and achievements. These choices determine whether we become clear to the future or mysterious, whether our purposes remain interpretable or fade into speculation. The mysteries also illuminate the relationship between evidence and interpretation, how the same facts generate different theories, depending on the frameworks we bring to analysis. The Nazca Lines are simultaneously ritual paths and water maps and astronomical calendars, each interpretation finding support in the evidence, none definitively excluding the others. Perhaps the answer is that the lines served multiple purposes, meant different things at different times to different groups, that our desire for single correct interpretation imposes false simplicity on complex cultural phenomena. Ancient peoples were no less capable of nuanced, multivalent symbolism than we are, no less likely to create works that operated on multiple levels simultaneously. Tonight's mysteries share another characteristic. They concern peoples and achievements at civilization's heights, not its beginnings. The Maya, the Egyptians, the Greeks who built the Antikythera mechanism, the Nazca, these were sophisticated societies with complex social organization, specialized knowledge, the surplus resources that allow for massive projects and elaborate cultural expressions. Mystery does not belong only to primitive or simple societies. does not mark ignorance or lack of development. Indeed, sometimes the most advanced societies leave the most puzzling legacies, their very sophistication producing works we struggle to fully comprehend. This inverts common assumptions about progress and understanding, suggests that advancement creates new forms of mystery rather than eliminating mystery altogether. What do we do with mysteries we cannot solve? We can let them frustrate us, treat them as failures of investigation or temporary gaps that sufficient effort will eventually close, or we can allow them to remain open questions, productive uncertainties that keep us curious, that remind us how much we do not know, that invite continued engagement across generations. The mysteries we have explored tonight have persisted for decades, centuries, sometimes millennia, yet they remain alive in human consciousness, subjects of ongoing research and speculation, puzzles that each generation approaches anew with fresh perspectives and technologies. Perhaps this is their ultimate purpose, to remain unsolved long enough to teach us about the nature of knowing and not knowing, about how history works and how it fails, about what survives the passage of time and what vanishes beyond recovery. They are monuments to human achievement and human limitation intertwined, evidence of what our ancestors could accomplish and what we cannot fully understand about their accomplishments. They keep the past alive by keeping it partially hidden, make history vital by ensuring it retains capacity to surprise us. As you drift towards sleep tonight, these mysteries might mingle with dreams, their unanswered questions becoming material for the mind's nocturnal wanderings. The Maya cities overgrown with jungle, the gears of ancient mechanisms clicking through celestial calculations, the prisoners in velvet masks, the stones of Stonehenge catching solstice light, the Nazca lines drawn across sand and time. They exist in that liminal space between knowledge and imagination, between fact and speculation, between what we can prove and what we can only wonder about. And perhaps that space is exactly where such mystery should reside, neither fully known nor completely unknowable, but forever inviting us to look closer, think deeper, imagine more generously about the capabilities and motivations of people who shared our humanity but lived in worlds we can barely reconstruct. The night is deep now, and these stories have run their course. The mysteries remain, patient and persistent, waiting for whatever answers time and investigation might eventually provide, or waiting to remain forever mysterious, their questions outliving all the generations who posed them. Either way, they have given us tonight's journey, this voyage through human ingenuity and human limitation, through triumph and loss, through the known and the unknowable. Let them settle gently into rest as you do the same. Let the questions fade into quiet as consciousness yields to sleep. Let history's enigmas become the gentle puzzles of dreams where anything might be true, and nothing needs complete explanation. Thank you for journeying with me through these 10 mysteries. May your rest be peaceful, your dreams be curious, and your wonder at the past complexities remain vibrant. Until we meet again, good night.